Rocketcat and Rocketbird, Legends of Warfare Innovation. The curious and controversial history of animals and combat tactics. The concept of rocket cats originates from a 16th century military treatise authored by Franz Helm, an artillery master from Cologne, Germany. Helm's work, titled Buch von den Probierten Kunsten, which translates to Book of the Tested Arts, explains various unconventional warfare tactics, including the particular notion of utilizing cats and birds equipped with incendiary devices to ignite enemy fortifications. Franz Helm authored his treatise during a period of substantial military innovation, particularly regarding the use of gunpowder and artillery. His manuscript, published in 1625, was widely circulated in Germanic regions and included illustrations showing animals, especially cats, with devices resembling jetpacks strapped to their backs. According to Helm, the objective was to release the animal near an enemy city or fortress. The plan was for the scared animal to naturally seek shelter in the city's wooden buildings, stables, or other fire-prone areas. Helm theorized that the resulting chaos would induce panic among the defenders, possibly compelling them to abandon their stronghold or redirect resources to manage the fires. Rocket Bird was not a novel idea. In the 10th century, Olga of Kiev sought retribution against the Drevlians for the murder of her husband, King Igor of the Kievan Rus. After her husband's death, the Drevlians proposed that Olga marry their prince, Prince Mal. Olga pretended to agree, then had first the ambassadors and then another group of emissaries murdered. Olga subsequently held a funeral feast for King Igor in the Drevlian city of Iskorostin, where he had been killed. The Drevlians were invited to partake in the feast. When they became drunk, she ordered her retinue to massacre them. The primary chronicle claims 5,000 Drevlians were killed that night, but that still wasn't enough for Olga. She returned to Kiev to prepare an army to finish off the remaining Drevlians. The initial conflict between the armies of the two nations went very well for Olga's army, who won the battle handily and drove the survivors back into their cities. Olga then led her army to Iskorostin, the city where her husband, King Igor, had been slain. Olga ordered her army to lay siege to the city. The siege lasted an entire year without success. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Olga devised a plan to trick the Drevlians by requesting peace and asking for a tribute of 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each household. The Drevlians, relieved at so small a price to end the siege, sent the tribute of birds. Olga had her soldiers use cloth to bind sulfur to each bird. When night fell, Olga ordered her soldiers to set the birds alight and release them. The frightened birds flew back into the city and set it on fire. The fires were impossible to contain, and the Drevlians fled their burning city, only to be captured or killed by Olga's armies. In the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire sought to conquer the island of Sicily, deploying Commander George Maniakes for this mission. Harald Hardrada, or Harold the Ruthless, later King Harold III of Norway, served as a mercenary and besieged several Sicilian settlements during his service to the Byzantine Empire under Commander George Maniakes. The first unnamed settlement that Harold besieged was noted for its large population and strong fortifications. The walls were much too strong for siege engines to breach. Harold received intelligence that the army could not continue the siege until the residents starved, since the city was well stocked with both food and water. Harold Hardrada soon realized the city hosted an abundance of birds that were constantly flying between the city and the nearby woods. Harold formulated a plan and organized a group of skilled bird catchers. He instructed them to capture as many birds as possible that had flown into the forest. Harold reportedly ordered that the birds be covered with flammable materials, including wax and sulfur. Unfortunately for the birds, Harold had them set alight. The frightened birds fled back into the city. The birds, resembling shooting stars, managed to fly back into the Sicilian city, where they took shelter in the rafters or perhaps crash-landed onto the flammable medieval roofs. According to King Harold's saga, the city was overtaken by flames, causing the inhabitants to flee and surrendered to Harold Hardrada. Using animals in military tactics was not limited to Olga of Kiev or Harold Hardrada's fiery birds. Throughout history, the idea of employing creatures as tools of warfare has led to success and failure. Successful tactics include using horses, donkeys, or even elephants as beasts of burden, dogs as attack animals, medical supply carriers, or guards. Even pigeons successfully carried messages. By the time Franz Helm recorded his concepts in the 16th century, the use of animals in conflict had evolved significantly, often incorporating the advancements of the age, such as gunpowder and explosives. Using animals in military operations isn't confined to the medieval period. During the Second World War, between September 1st, 1939 and September 2nd, 1945, both the USSR and American armies tried to use animals to a tactical advantage. These experiments failed in unusual ways. In 1924, the USSR Military Council approved the use of dogs for military tasks like rescue, first aid delivery, communication, mine tracking, transporting supplies and injured soldiers, combat assistance, and enemy target destruction. In the 1930s, dogs were developed as mobile mines. 12 regional schools were opened, including 3 for training anti-tank dogs. The original strategy involved training a dog to carry an explosive device or mine to a stationary target. The dog would pull a belt with its teeth, releasing the mine, and then return to the handler. Detonation could be done with a remote control, or more likely a timer. Despite 6 months of training, no dogs mastered this task. They performed well on single targets, but became confused when the target or location changed, often returning with the mine unreleased, risking the lives of both the dog and the trainer. Continual failures led to a simplification. While in the first program the dog was trained to locate a specific target, in the second program the task was simplified to find any enemy tank. Dogs were trained by being kept hungry. When they were fed, their food was placed under tanks. The first dogs were trained with tanks that were left standing still to conserve fuel. After the failure of the initial anti-tank dogs, the tank engine was left running, which was further combined with sporadic gunfire and other battle-related distractions. The dogs carried the mines in canvas saddlebags. A wooden lever extended out of the saddlebag by about 8 inches. The mines also had safety pins like grenades, which were removed just before deployment. When the dog ran under the tank, the lever struck the bottom of the tank, killing the dog and potentially disabled the tank. The first deployment of anti-tank dogs at the front line occurred in late summer of 1941, comprising 30 dogs and 40 trainers. This operation uncovered several critical issues. To conserve fuel and ammunition, remember how the first dogs had been trained with immobile tanks to conserve fuel? They never fired their weapons either, so the dogs hesitated to approach moving tanks in combat conditions. Some of the dogs politely followed the tanks, waiting for them to stop, but were shot in the process. The gunfire from the tanks also frightened the dogs, causing some of them to flee back to the trenches, where the armed mines could potentially detonate, which would result in casualties among the Soviet soldiers. To mitigate this risk, the frightened dogs had to be shot, often by their trainers. This caused the trainers to be reluctant to work with new dogs. Records show 6 dogs detonated upon returning to Soviet trenches, causing fatalities and injuries. Additionally, 3 dogs were killed by German troops who examined the detonation mechanisms and gained valuable intelligence. The effectiveness of employing anti-tank dogs during World War II remains a subject of debate. Soviet sources claim that approximately 300 German tanks were damaged by these dogs. However, after 1942, the Red Army significantly reduced the use of anti-tank dogs, shifting focus to training mine detection and delivery dogs. Nonetheless, the training of anti-tank dogs persisted beyond World War II, continuing until June of 1996. In 1943, the United States urgently required a method to accurately guide bombs towards targets in Nazi Germany. This necessity gave rise to Project Pigeon. The psychologist and inventor B.F. Skinner trained pigeons as part of a missile guidance system. The U.S. Navy's radar-guided Bat glide bomb was essentially a small glider with an explosive warhead section in the center and a guidance section in the nose cone. The concept was to train pigeons to act as pilots for the device by using their cognitive abilities to recognize the target. The guidance system consisted of 3 lenses mounted in the nose, which projected an image of the target onto a screen inside the nose cone. This screen was mounted on pivots and fitted with sensors that measured angular movement. Pigeons were trained through a type of behavior modification called operant conditioning to recognize the target. They were positioned in front of the screen. When the pigeons saw the target, they would peck at the target on the screen. They were trained by being shown an image of the target and gradually required to peck more and more rapidly for a grain of food. If the target remained in the center, the screen would not move, but if the bomb veered off track, the target image would move towards the edge of the screen. The pigeons would follow the image, pecking at it, causing the screen to move on its pivots. Sensors would detect movement and guide the bomb to the target. By following the projected image, the pigeons corrected deviations, incurring accuracy. Sadly, the pigeons couldn't escape, making their first mission their last. Regardless of a successful demonstration, officials were skeptical and terminated Project Pigeon on October 8, 1944, prioritizing other projects with more immediate combat potential. The Navy briefly revived Project Pigeon as Project Oricon in 1948, but canceled again in 1953 when electronic guidance systems proved reliable. Even stranger than Project Pigeon was Bat Bomb, later Project X-Ray. Bat Bomb commenced in August of 1946, focusing on the use of bats as weapons. The bats were deployed using bomb-shaped casings that contained over 1,000 compartments, each containing a hibernating bat equipped with a small incendiary device. Released from a bomber at dawn, the casings deployed parachutes mid-flight, opening the bomb to release the bats. The bats would disperse and roost in eaves and attics within a 20 to 40 mile radius. The incendiaries, set on timers, would then ignite, causing fires in inaccessible locations within the predominantly wood and paper structures of the targeted Japanese cities. Lytle S. Adams, a dental surgeon from Irwin, Pennsylvania, came up with the idea of a bat bomb, inspired by a trip to Carlsbad Caverns National Park with its numerous bats. Adams suggested that bats could carry incendiary devices. He observed that bats were strong, roosted before dawn, and most buildings in Tokyo were wooden. He suggested dropping bats with time-release incendiaries over Tokyo to set the city ablaze. Adams was acquainted with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, and so the scheme came to the attention of the White House. A team was assembled to determine several variables necessary for the project's feasibility, including the type of incendiaries to be attached to the bats and the temperature and conditions required to keep the bats in hibernation during shipment. To achieve this, bats were placed in ice cube trays and cooled. Additionally, the team had to select an appropriate species of bat for the bombs. After testing various species, the Mexican freetail bat was chosen. Approval was obtained from the National Park Service to harvest large quantities of Mexican freetail bats from caves on government-owned land. American chemist Louis Fieser suggested using his invention, napalm, as the incendiary. Tests showed that a 14-gram bat could carry 15 to 18 grams of napalm. The napalm was stored in small cellulose containers called H2 units, which were attached with adhesive to the front of the bat. The bomb carrier, a 5-foot metal tube, had 26 30-inch diameter trays inside, holding up to 1,040 bats. It was meant to be dropped from an airplane. At 4,000 feet, a parachute would deploy, causing panels to fall away, releasing the bats. However, the hibernating bats struggled to recover and fly, often falling to the ground due to their increased weight. A series of tests were conducted to answer various operational questions. On May 15, 1943, the Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base caught fire when armed bats were accidentally released. The bats roosted under a fuel tank and ignited the test range. After this setback, the Navy took over the project in August of 1943 and renamed it Project X-Ray. It was then transferred to the Marine Corps. That December, the Marine Corps moved Project X-Ray to the Marine Corps Air Station at El Centro, California. Several experiments and adjustments led to a definitive test on Japanese Village, a mock-up of a Japanese city. Observers noted positive results. The chief of incendiary testing wrote, "A reasonable number of destructive fires can be started in spite of the extremely small size of the units. The main advantage of the units would seem to be their placement within the enemy structure, without the knowledge of the householder or fire watchers, thus allowing the fire to establish itself before being discovered." The National Defense Research Committee observer stated, "X-ray is an effective weapon." Further tests were planned for mid-1944, but the program was canceled because it couldn't be combat ready until mid-1945. The atomic bomb was deployed in August of 1945. Marine mammals, specifically dolphins, seals, sea lions, and even beluga whales, have been used for various military operations, including detecting and marking underwater mines, guarding ships and submarines, and even potentially identifying and tagging enemy swimmers. The program's history includes deployment during the Vietnam War, the Iran-Iraq War, and various counter-terrorism operations. Dolphins have been trained to detect and mark underwater mines, patrol harbor areas and sea lanes in order to detect and identify potential threats, including submarines or enemy swimmers. Sea lions retrieve the marked mines and recover lost items from the seabed. In Russia, dolphins and seals have been trained to assist divers by carrying tools as well as to detect torpedoes, mines, and other ammunition at working depths of up to 400 feet. In 2019, a beluga named Valdemir was found off the coast of Norway. Believed to be trained by the Russian Navy, the beluga wore a harness labeled "Equipment of St. Petersburg." He appeared comfortable around humans. He even tried to pull ropes from a Norwegian fishing vessel. A research institute for the Russian Navy explored using belugas to guard naval base entrances and assist deepwater divers. However, it was concluded that dolphins and seals were more suitable for military tasks in polar conditions than belugas. There are reports of marine mammals being used for surveillance and reconnaissance, even to the point of being equipped with cameras or other devices. One of the most outlandish uses of an animal in a military operation has got to be acoustic kitty. During the Cold War, the CIA came up with the idea of using a cat as a spy. At the time, the CIA was experimenting with audio surveillance methods by inserting miniature microphones into bullets designed to withstand the force of a gunshot while continuing to record. These tests resulted in small and durable microphones, but did not produce a usable spy bullet, since the microphone captured all sounds, relevant or irrelevant, rendering most recordings largely useless. A former CIA officer explained that cats were chosen because their cochlear anatomy allows them to filter and focus sound like humans. The experimental cat had a power pack implanted in her abdomen, a powered microphone implanted in her ear, and her tail was used as an antenna. Later, a wile was also implanted in her brain. This setup ensured the cat wouldn't be distracted by hunger or other urges. A CIA technician emphasized that the implant could not affect the cat's natural movements or cause irritation, since this could hinder performance. The initial mission of the Acoustic Kitty project was to eavesdrop on two individuals in a park outside the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. The cat was released nearby, but was reportedly hit and killed by a taxi. In 2013, this claim was refuted by Robert Wallace, a former director of the Office of Technical Services, who asserted that the project was abandoned due to the challenges in training the cat to comply with the requirements. Wallace added that the equipment was removed from the cat, which lived a long and happy life afterwards. Subsequent tests did not yield positive results, leading to the project being suspended in 1967. A closing memorandum stated that the CIA researchers believed that they could train cats to move short distances, but the environmental and security factors in using this technique in a real foreign situation force us to conclude that for our purposes it would not be practical. However, some accounts suggest the project achieved a certain level of success. The realm of unconventional military strategies is filled not only with the use of intelligent marine mammals, but with equally bizarre concepts that stretch the imagination. Through centuries, humanity has sought inventive ways to gain advantages in warfare, some rooted in pragmatism, others teetering on the edge of absurdity. These efforts serve as a testament to human creativity under pressure. History is replete with tales of such endeavors where living creatures were repurposed as tools of war, often facing practical challenges, whether it's anti-tank dogs, rocket cats and fiery birds, mine-locating dolphins, bat bombs, or spy cats. These ideas, though they sound more like tales from a fantasy novel, are grounded in historic records that underscore humanity's relentless pursuit of innovation and its profound disregard for the implications. Next time you see a cat on the street, remember the travesty of Rocketcat and the legacy of the acoustic kitty.